Deterrence is no longer a solo act. In the 21st century, deterrence is not about a singular power. It is about distributed power, industrial resilience, network sensors, shooters, sustained energy flows, and interoperable military systems that survive beyond the first salvo. Traditional alliances are breaking or bending, and new forms of cooperation are emerging in response to a real battlefield lessons. The quiet but consequential convergence among Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey is one such development, and it carries implications far beyond regional borders. What we're seeing is not a statement, not just a treaty, but a system of capability built on combat validation, industrial growth, and strategic necessity. This convergence challenges old assumptions about how wars are fought and deterrence is maintained. Tonight, we dissect not only what the convergence looks like, but why it matters, and who it forces to rethink their own strategies. My name is Qasim, and welcome to Radar Mode. Today's episode is not about a retrospective. It is forward-looking. It is about deterrence, doctrine, industrial acceleration, and strategic adaptation. We begin with the formal entry point, the Saudi-Pakistan Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement, the SMDA, signed in September 2025. That pact pledged that an aggression against one shall be considered an aggression against both. Language strikingly similar to NATO's Article 5. This was not symbolic. It reflected decades of cooperation being codified in a defense architecture that is now beginning to see operational planning and joint exercises. At the same time, Turkey, long a NATO member, an independent defense industrial power, has confirmed it is in advanced discussions to join this framework, cooperating not just strategically but industrially. These aren't rhetorical affirmations. They are public statements from foreign ministers and defense officials that signal real intent. What follows is an examination of how this convergence is reshaping deterrence, strategy, driving industrial cooperation, and influencing global actors, particularly India and the United States. Pakistan's strategic posture has historically been defined as the imperative of survival against a conventionally larger adversary. But what changed in 2025 was proof on the battlefield, not just theory. In May 2025, Pakistan's armed forces engaged in a limited but intense conflict that tested its doctrine under real conditions. The Pakistan Air Force successfully integrated airborne early warning systems, electronic warfare platforms, precision strike fighters, and ground command networks to execute coordinated operations. The result was not just simply tactical success, it was operational credibility. That credibility was recognized internationally. By early 2026, multiple defense publications reported that Pakistan's defense exports, led by the JF-17 Thunder fighter, were gaining real traction. With 13 countries in advanced discussions about procurement, analysis noted that this was because the JF-17 was now seen as a combat-tested and offered a balance of capability and affordability. Pakistan is actively planning to double JF-17's production capacity by 2027 to meet this rising demand. A significant industrial shift from mere domestic provisioning to export-oriented deterrence capacity. Pakistan Aeronautical Complex, the PSC, now functions as a defense industrial hub, concluding not just assembly, but avionics integration, upgrades, and sustainment, essential for wartime logistics and long-term deterrence. Private sector companies in Pakistan have also entered the defense ecosystem, supplying drones, sensors, and support systems. This broader industrial base anchors a more sustainable deterrence posture, giving Pakistan both strategic and economic incentives to deepen defense cooperation. Enter Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's participation is grounded in its transformation from an energy exporter to a nation that views energy infrastructure as a strategic terrain in modern conflict. The attacks on oil and gas facilities in recent years exposed how vulnerable strategic energy infrastructure can be in wartime. Riyadh responded by strengthening not only hard defenses, but strategic partnerships. The 2025 SMDA with Pakistan was not just framed as a reaction to any one event. Saudi officials characterized it as the formalization of decades of military cooperation, from training and professional exchanges to shared security planning. Saudi leadership, including Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, emphasized that the Defense Pact was about shared security responsibilities, signaling a shift away from reliance on one single external guarantor, namely the US, towards a collective deterrence model. Saudi Arabia's contribution to this convergence is threefold. First, it brings strategic depth. Its geography offers basing options and staging ground for joint operations across the Red Sea, Gulf, and the Eastern Mediterranean axis, areas where regional security flashpoints intersect. Secondly, it brings energy leverage. In wartime, energy flow stability becomes a force multiplier. A nation that can ensure sustained energy supplies in times of crisis conditions holds strategic power over global markets and adversary endurance. Thirdly, Saudi Arabia brings financial and industrial defense capacity, backed by some of the world's largest sovereign capital reserves. Riyadh has funded air defense upgrades, layered missile defense systems, and joint training frameworks that enhance collective deterrence. Senior Saudi military planners have publicly expressed the goal of the shared regional security with Pakistan, and they have looked favorably on extending cooperation beyond bilateral ties. This sets the stage for deeper integration. Turkey's role in this convergence cannot be overstated. Not because Ankara is geopolitically central, but because it has manifested defense industrial autonomy in a way few middle powers have ever. Turkish defense exports reached approximately USD 7.1 billion in 2024, a figure that reflects solid growth and diversification. Turkish UAV platforms, especially the Bayraktar TBU and the Akinci, are now fielded in over 35 countries and have been credited with reshaping battlefield dynamics in multiple theaters. This export footprint is comparable to some European defense exporters, but has achieved outside traditional alliance structures. Turkish drone systems have consistently performed against peer and near-peer air defenses, demonstrating endurance, sensor fusion, and autonomous strike capability, elements that are now part of defense planners' baseline expectations for future combat operations. But Turkey's ambitions extend beyond UAVs. Enter the Khan 5th generation fighter, a program that reflects a deliberate move into high-end aerospace production, signaling Ankara's intent to develop indigenous stealth, avionics, and sensor fusion capabilities. If Khan reaches full operational capability, Turkey could join an exclusive club of nations producing advanced combat aircraft for the future. Importantly, Turkish officials, including Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, have publicly discussed expanded defense cooperation among Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, emphasizing that any framework must be built on regional trust and shared security goals. President Tayyip Erdogan has repeatedly stressed that Turkey seeks cooperative defense, not competition, among Muslim and regional states, a narrative that underwrites the industrial and strategic dimension of this convergence. The Turkish defense industry also extends into naval construction, missile systems, and electronic warfare. Turkish shipyards now produce corvettes, frigates, and amphibious vessels under export contracts, creating an industrial base that supports sustained maritime operations, an asset vital for any coalition looking to secure sea lanes. India's strategic posture has long been structured around the assumptions of technological advancement, superiority, diplomatic isolation of Pakistan, and selective defense partnerships with Western states. But this evolving convergence complicates all three pillars. First, Pakistan's real-world combat performance and expanding defense exports have chipped away at the narrative of military inferiority. Indian planners are now forced to treat Pakistan as a combat-proven operational partner with a broader security ecosystem. Second, Turkey's industrial contributions, especially in UAVs and aerospace development, introduce a dimension that India must now counter with its own indigenous and imported capabilities. Thirdly, Saudi Arabia's strategic depth and energy leverage influence India's calculus. especially given India's heavy reliance on Gulf energy imports and maritime security along the Indian Ocean. Indian analysts have publicly voiced concern about Turkey's expanding support to Pakistan, including military cooperation and defense ties. These critiques have underscored that Islamabad's external partnerships complicate India's strategic options. Indian officials have also noted that the Saudi-Pakistan pact, if expanded, could have implications for regional stability and crisis management. Not because India intends aggression, but because it alters deterrence stability. In short, India no longer faces Pakistan alone. It now confronts a networked threat environment where Pakistan's capabilities are reinforced by industrial and strategic partners. For the United States, this emerging convergence represents a shift in how regional security will be structured in the coming decades. Washington remains as the preeminent military power globally, yet its influence is contested in several key regions. The SMDA between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, which frames aggression against one as aggression against both, signals a willingness to share deterrent responsibilities that once were assumed to lie within the US security umbrella. Pakistan's defense minister has publicly emphasized that inclusion of additional partners in this framework requires mutual consent and shared strategic vision, a point that underlines the autonomy being exercised by regional states. For US policymakers, this means that deterrence no longer necessarily routes through American systems. Partners are fielding their own integrated capabilities, building indigenous production lines, and conducting military planning that's networked but not Western-centric. This reduces US influence over escalation dynamics, coalition management, and crisis outcomes. While the US will continue to engage with each of these states, given their strategic importance, the emerging pattern is clear. Regional deterrence is becoming decentralized, multi-vector, and operationally independent. What makes this convergence disruptive and why it demands sober analysis is not just the individual capabilities involved, but how they interlock into a multi-domain deterrence ecosystem. Pakistan brings battlefield-validated doctrine and growing industrial capability. Turkey contributes industrial velocity, export success, and cutting-edge technology in UAVs, naval systems, and aerospace development. Saudi Arabia provides strategic geographic depth, financial endurance, and control over energy arteries that fuel both civilian economies and wartime logistics. Together, they create an ecosystem that is redundant, resilient, and networked in contrast to a single supplier model. This architecture distributes capability across states with independent industrial bases. In crisis, this means that disruptions in one supply line can be compensated by others. That loss of platform does not mean loss of a capability, and that sustained operations are possible, even under geopolitical pressure. This is what modern deterrence looks like. Not just simply large stockpiles, but distributed production integrating sensors and layered defenses, and multi-node command networks that function even when challenged. For an adversary contemplating coercion, this system increases the operational cost of aggression, the uncertainty of outcome, and the risk of escalation, which is exactly the objective of credible deterrence. While this convergence highlights decades of cooperation, global analysts and neutral observers have consistently emphasized that its significance goes beyond ceremonial gestures. It is a tangible signal of regional states hedging against uncertainty, diversifying security partnerships, and asserting operational autonomy. The pact drew attention not just for its immediate bilateral implications, but for the potential inclusion of Turkey, which would extend both the geographical footprint and the industrial depth of this security network. Think tanks, such as the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, have highlighted that the pact as a potential first step towards a NATO-style security alignment in this region. They caution, however, that such speculation remains contingent on practical integration, shared command interoperability, and consistent political will as prerequisites that cannot be assumed. Regional and international media, including Middle East Eye and Reuters, have noted that SMDA reflects concerns over the reliability of US security guarantees. particularly after instances where Washington's responses to attacks on Gulf infrastructure were perceived as muted or inconsistent. Neutral commentators argue that this is a key driver behind the pact. Gulf and South Asian states are seeking redundant deterrence mechanisms so that they don't only rely on a distant guarantor like the United States. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists underscored this particular interpretation, noting that Riyadh's strategy combines both reassurance for its own population and a broader message to the global actors. Regional security can no longer depend entirely on US intervention. Finally, experts underscored that the inclusion of Turkey with its advanced UAV production, naval shipbuilding, and developing fifth-generation fighter programs would add significant operational and industrial weight. Analysts from Bloomberg and Daily Sabah highlight Ankara's ability to provide both high-tech platforms and proven battlefield experience, particularly in drone warfare and integrated sensor networks. This could allow the alliance to project influence and sustain operations with resilience that exceeds the sum of its parts. In short, the neutral global consensus sees this Pakistan-Saudi-Turkey convergence as a pragmatic response to uncertain US reliability, evolving regional threats, and multipolar pressures. It is a strategic hedge designed to increase deterrence through distributed capability rather than an aggressive bloc intended to provoke conflict. Yet, experts do caution that political alignment, operational integration, and strategic coherence remains hurdles. And the world will watch closely to see if this network can translate political will into sustained, credible deterrence. The Saudi-Pakistan-Turkey convergence is no longer hypothetical. It is an emerging reality, grounded in battlefield credibility, industrial strength, strategic geography, and shared deterrence priorities. But the story is still being written. Will this convergence evolve into a formal defense architecture with integrated command structures? Will other regional actors, including Gulf states, Central Asian republics, and Indo-Pacific partners, seek affiliation or cooperation models? And how will traditional powers like the United States, China, and India adapt when deterrence is distributed across networked capability systems and not in single suppliers? Over time, these questions will become increasingly important because in future crises, the side that shapes the system, not just the battlefield, will determine the outcome. That's all from us for tonight. If this episode expanded your strategic understanding, hit that like button, share that video, and subscribe to the channel. If you would like us to discuss a particular defense and geopolitics topic, drop it in the comments. I'm Qasim, and thanks for watching Radar Mode on Pakistan Connect. I'll catch you again next week. Until then, stay alert, stay curious, and keep your radar mode on.